Well, welcome back. Unit 13, Navigating Conflict. It's kind of the unit you've been waiting for. Unfortunately, we all kind of resonate with the idea of conflict. In fact, the issue really is not if there's going to be conflict, but the question is when there is conflict. How are we going to deal with it, and how are we going to deal with it effectively? Now, in your presentation notes, I took the time to write down a bunch of dictionary definitions. As you listen to those dictionary definitions, I want you to kind of think more about your context, about a ministry context or a church, because I think it'll resonate better. But here's what the dictionary says, what a conflict is. It says it's a fight, a battle, warfare, strife, especially prolonged controversy. They use the word quarrel, argument, contention, dispute, rivalry, confrontation, competition, antagonism, or opposition as between interest or principles. Then they go on and say discord or action, feeling or effect, disunity, disharmony, variance, dissension, incompatibility, interference, and then they kind of wrap it up with saying a mental struggle arising from opposing demands, impulse, a striking together, or a collision. Wow, that makes me just want to get motivated right there. But that's what conflict is. And unfortunately, sometimes in our churches, it can really escalate. But perhaps more importantly, let me try to give us a definition, or at least some type of framework that we can use about conflict in a church situation. And here again, look at your presentation notes, but I'm going to kind of try to unpack a more detailed definition of conflict in a church. I say it's a disrupting situation in the congregation or ministry involving a struggle between two or more members or groups over what is or appears to be mutually exclusive or incompatible, and I'm looking at a bunch of areas. Sometimes it's we're incompatible, or we just don't see it the same way about established beliefs or cherished values, desired goals, assumed powers, or scarce resources. Now, I want you to think just for a moment. We don't want to move on too fast here. Where have you seen a congregation kind of get either a little tension or a whole lot of tension between difference of opinion about beliefs or values, or what about what they want to accomplish, their goals? Or have you ever seen a power struggle? Oh, yeah, I have too, okay? Or sometimes it's about a scarce resource. We don't have enough funds to do everything, so what are we going to do? And people have difference of opinions about that. Or maybe it's as simple as, well, I scheduled for the senior adults the use of the church van, but the middle schoolers jumped out after the service real fast and took off on it to do a Sunday afternoon activity. And by the time the senior adults got out to the van, it was gone. Oh, I can see where the conflict could easily erupt. Now, in conflict, we see different types. Sometimes it's conflict just interpersonal, with dealing with difficult people. And sometimes the conflict is more about strategies, events, goals, values, mission, beliefs, those types of things. I want to just deal with this difficult people situation quickly because, hey, people are people, and we find those. And they're in our churches, they're in mine, they're in yours. And sometimes we can smile about it, and sometimes it's a little more challenging. And kind of in a humorous way, let me say that some people are like Sherman tanks. They'll move over, they'll just run over you if you let them. Sometimes we have people that think they're the star performer. They believe that they ought to get the preferential treatment. Sometimes people think that they're kind of confused. They think they're a megaphone and they want to dominate all the speech and noise. And then we have the negative side of the bubble burster. and they're the person that deflates everyone's enthusiasm. Have a volcano, they can just explode like St. Helens on a moment's notice. Sometimes we have people that, they're kind of a crybaby. They're chronically complaining, and it's just like that, just wears you down. And you have the nitpicker, the unpleasing, unpleasant perfectionist, and then unfortunately, we have the backbiter, who's the master of the calculated rumor. And then sometimes, I don't know if I deal with a difficult person, but they're just kind of hard to sometimes work with, is the space cadet. It's like they're on a different wavelength. Well, as we think about these different types of people in our congregations, and obviously there are some that are much more destructive as they become antagonistic in situations in our church, let me just suggest some principles that we want to use as we deal with them. You need to recognize, first of all, that we can't please everyone. When you think about that, I want to reference John chapter 15 or chapter 5, verse 31. It says, "If I testify about myself, my testimony is not valid." Even God can't do that. One wants rain, one wants sunshine, and those are some situations, and we just have to recognize that Christ couldn't please everybody. We're not going to please everybody. Second thing, we need to refuse to play their game. Book of Matthew, it says this, "But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, 'You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me?'" We need to learn to say no to unrealistic expectations. Just don't get in the trap of trying to please everyone. A third suggestion that I would make on this dealing with difficult people is to never retaliate. Again, from the book of Matthew, we read, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Wow, that's a hard one. But retaliating, in some ways, brings us down to their level. And that's never going to be a productive type of situation. It almost goes without saying, but fourthly, we need to pray for them. But I tell you, again, book of Matthew, "But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you." It'll help both of you. Let God deal with them. Don't retaliate. Pray for them. Part of this is involved controlling our temper. It's much easier to pray for them and not retaliate and all of that if we're able to control our temper. In 2 Corinthians 5, we read, "From now on, then, we do not know anyone from a worldly perspective." If we were to go on in that passage, we would read where it says we are to be agents of reconciliation. That's tough. Control our temper. Another suggestion would be quick to forgive and even quicker to ask forgiveness. And then a last suggestion, and this one's hard for me, is that we need to remember that everything has God's fingerprints on it. We don't see the full picture. That negative, difficult person, God may be working in their life in ways that we don't know and understand, and we want to do everything that we can to facilitate that change that's going on in their life. Sometimes we feel like we've got to take care of ourselves and protect ourselves, and God may be working on us too. Scripture, Luke 14, "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and everyone who humbles himself will be exalted." Wow. It's an amazing thing how we need to work and respond as we deal with difficult people. But sometimes it's not just difficult people. The fact is, sometimes we're dealing with real issues and real substantive change that there's different opinions on, there's different responses, and we need to look at those. So I want to talk about that type of situation right now. So some basic principles is, first of all, is that we need to know the issue. Sometimes the presenting issue, what we're hearing the noise about, is not the real issue. We may hearing that someone is going to vote no on a particular issue, and when the fact is there really was just a sense of personal loss. Maybe their spouse the funeral was held in that auditorium that you're thinking about tearing down and moving on, and they're still dealing with unresolved grief. Okay. Sometimes it is they were in another church in which the church got overextended financially and had to close, and so they are very conscious of debt. We need to know the issues, both on a systemic way as well as on an individual aspect. But ultimately, we need to focus on the presenting issue, where we can help the people in conflict say, look, this is what we're trying to deal with. Once we identify, and it's usually helpful to write that situation out and to say, does this capture what you're thinking about? And to another group, does this capture what you're thinking about? And we can all agree on that substantive issue, the presenting issue. And then we can decide how we're going to communicate and how we're going to interact with each other. We're going to realize that it's okay to wait. We don't have to react to every volatile situation in a moment. As we communicate, we're not going to overreact. At least we're going to resist it and try to deal with that. We're going to think about what are the things that we value in the midst of a conflict. Identifying those types of things at the very begin of the process really helps us to de-escalate the conflict, or at a very minimum, at least develop a framework where the group knows that they're working together. Because then we can engage in controlled intervention. We say, well, okay, in this area, we're going to deal with this. And can we help you, this person? Can we help this? Can we, all those types of things. We can keep lines of the door of opportunity open. We can be patient with the process, and hopefully these types of principles reduce negativity and allow us to invest our time wisely. I want to share with you on your presentation notes, and probably going to need to look there just because it's such detailed, that as we are working in a process of conflict, ideally we're moving toward some type of collaborative experience. We're working together. And the reason I say look at your presentation notes, because you're going to see a graph there. And it says that one thing is that we have a concern for our personal goals. We all do. And some it's more intense than others, and some it's incredibly intense. Others of us, we are really more concerned about the relationships of the group. All of us have some concern, I hope, but some have an incredible amount of concern. And understanding this graph helps us as we think about how we're interacting with people in conflict. Let me give you an illustration. If I am concerned so much about accomplishing my goals, or what I perceive to be the church's goals, and I don't care about relationships, I'm just going to push and push and push. In fact, that's sometimes called a forcing style of conflict. Some people have used an animal and said it's like the shark. I'm going to get my way and take things out. On the other side, let's say if we overemphasize our concern for the relationships, for the people, we may never be able to accomplish the goals that are set before us in our congregation. And so we are very low on that one side of the graph, and we're very high on the other. And we'll sometimes see that almost like a teddy bear. We just want to love on each other and hug on each other at the expense of moving forward together. Well, I think most of us could well understand the idea is that we want to keep the relationships intact as much as possible, and we want to accomplish the goals, the mission in which the church has been called. And so that's why we typically in conflict resolution recommend a collaborating style. We're working together. It's not about compromise. Compromise, you get half of what you want and don't get half of what you want, and you may still walk away dissatisfied. In collaboration, we all work together to accomplish the goals that we can all do together. And that collaboration style is really helpful in church life because it recognizes that maintaining relationships is important. We can't sacrifice those relationships. We need to realize that a collaboration style is going to take some time. It's not a quick fix. Sometimes, since we're dealing with peers and relationships within the congregation, it's really helpful to use that because we want to all still be able to live together when we finish. It's a lot of it's gaining consensus building. A lot of it is where we're trying to hear different types of perspectives and merge all of those together. So a collaborating style really has some advantages. It allows both sides, if there's two sides to this, to get what they want and to eliminate or at least minimize the negative feelings. Now, there's a disadvantage. I mean, it takes time. It takes a lot of effort. And so if you're looking for a quick fix in your style of dealing with conflict, the collaborating style is probably not. The collaborating style is one that is really designed for the long-term solution to big issues in the life of the church. Just some general takeaways, some principles. As you think about conflict in your congregation, as I think about it in mine, we need to be sensitive to other people's pain. It's so easy to get caught up in our own position or in what we think is the right way that we fail to mention the hurts that sometimes people are carrying through. You say, well, they just need to get over it. Well, it's probably not our business to determine other people's feelings. We telling them to get over it is decidedly unhealthy. I would encourage you to always start with a clear objective and a purpose and a strategy and keep the church's orientation, a future orientation in mind. The fact is that usually in conflict, the big issue is usually secondary. Usually there is some contributing issue that we need to resolve to allow us to move on to the primary issue. A little word of caution is sometimes there are people that just decide to be antagonistic. I don't know if it's a spiritual issue or a personality, psychological issue with them, but they're just antagonistic. And part of our responsibility as a leader is to corral them, to minimize their influence, to remove them as necessary. And let me encourage you as you think about dealing with conflict in your church, it's easy for all of us to get caught up in the throes of the moment and to lose our perspective. And so it's always a good idea to just kind of take a good deep breath, stop for a second and realize that we are called to model the Spirit of Christ. And in fact, let me just ask you a question. As you think about conflict, the quote on your presentation notes says, "If it is possible." It's a quote from Romans chapter 12, verse 18. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. No, you can't control everyone's actions. But the scripture says, as far as that depends on you, we want to model the Spirit of Christ. As always, look at the pause and reflect questions. Think about this unit. Interact with other students, perhaps on discussion boards, or at least talk with your mentor and find some ways to think through this idea of conflict and how we can navigate it. Blessings on you. Hope you have a great week.